Hey kids, it's Mr. Little. Hey, just want to touch base with you just one more time. I noticed while I'm sitting here and I'm watching some of the quiz grades come in, some of the check for understandings, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. So I just wanted to approach it with just a small mini lesson that will hopefully help a tremendous number of you. Obviously, the first thing you need to do is make sure you know the order and seasons. Regardless of whatever I show you today, if you don't know the order of your seasons, you're not going to get it correct, ever. So I'm going to go ahead and take a piece of paper, and I'm going to start drawing on it, and this, I hope, is going to basically be the lesson that I would have taught in the classroom to help you understand the seasons. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my sun, right there, okay? Then I'm going to draw 4 Earths. Because remember, we're after the 4 different seasons. Okay? So each one of these is going to represent the Earth. Okay? So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the axis. Okay? Remember, the axis has to point in the same direction all the time. So if you look at my picture here, you can see here that I've got 4 Earths with the axis all pointed in the same direction. Next thing I'm going to do is, to the best of my ability, since I'm not really good when it comes to art, I'm going to go ahead and put in an equator. Like so. So you can see right there, like so, I've got my equator drawn in. Now the first question that I need to ask, because I need a starting point, is which direction is the axis pointed in? If I pick one of the 2 sides, this is where I want to start, either here or here, because I'm going to figure out where my summer or my winter is. They're going to be on the left or the right side. I need to figure out which one shows the Earth pointed in the correct direction. So if I'm interested in answering questions about the Northern Hemisphere, I want to see, for instance, where would I get summer in the Northern Hemisphere? Well, if it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, it's going to have to be in the hemisphere that's pointed towards the sun, which if you look here, if you look at the left or the right, which one is pointed towards the sun? So I'm going to go ahead and mark it on my paper. I'm going to put in Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, Northern, Southern, like so, right? So I just added in the hemispheres. Now I got to answer the question, which hemisphere is pointing towards the sun? Because whichever hemisphere is pointing towards the sun, that's where I'm going to find summer. So if I look at it here, I can see right here, the Northern Hemisphere is pointed towards the sun. See that? So I can go ahead and write in up here, summer. Right? Let me back up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Okay? So my Northern Hemisphere is pointed towards the sun. So if it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, what season is it in the Southern Hemisphere? If you answered winter, you're correct. Remember, it's always the opposite. Okay? So I'm going to go in a clockwise direction to answer the rest of them. All right, so I just put in my arrows here. Okay? You can see there that I've got my arrows pointing the direction that I am traveling. So if I look at the one down here, now I should be able to answer it. What comes after summer, kids, in the Northern Hemisphere? Right? You would say fall or autumn. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in. Like so. All right? So if it's fall or autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, what season would it be in the Southern Hemisphere? Yep, spring. And now it's just a matter of going through and filling in the rest of the information. I could have actually started over here, summer and winter, and then just put in the opposite seasons on this side. That would have worked just as well. Because if you notice here, trying to see with, hopefully the light, the glare is not going to be too much. You can see there that the Southern Hemisphere, that in that location, it's now pointed towards the sun, so they're getting their summer, while the Northern Hemisphere is getting their winter. So I'll fill in the last one. After winter in the northern hemisphere comes spring, which means in the southern hemisphere it is going to be fall or autumn. So now I've got it filled out. I should be able to accurately answer the questions. But wait, there's more. Okay, notice that the axis is pointed in a specific direction, and that's the first thing that you have to look at is what is the direction of the axis? Because right now you can see it's pointed to my right. Okay, I want to show you another one. I'm going to go ahead and make the same type of drawing. Okay, so if you look at this one in comparison, kids, you will see that they are two very different ones, right? Look how my axis has changed, right? Now the axis is pointed in the opposite direction. So don't always think just because you've memorized one particular series that you're going to get it right. You always need to figure out where is the axis pointing towards the sun. If the northern hemisphere is pointing towards the sun, that's your summer. If the southern hemisphere is pointed towards the sun, that's your summer. So if I take a look at this particular one, right, now you should be able to see when I look at it, if I look over here, okay, which one, north or southern hemisphere, is pointed towards the sun? That's right, the southern hemisphere is pointed towards the sun. The axis is pointed towards the sun in this picture right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the correct season, which in this case is going to be summer, like so, which means that in the northern hemisphere it would be winter. And now I can fill in the rest. In fact, if I want to make my life really easy, I'm actually going to do this one next. Right? Because if it's winter over here in the northern hemisphere, because now the axis is pointed towards the sun, it's going to be summer. Like so, right? So now I've got those two filled in, and like I said, if you know your seasons, the rest of it's a piece of cake. So I just go through, and remember, I'm going in a counterclockwise direction, okay? Counterclockwise direction. So I go ahead and just fill in the rest. For the northern hemisphere, after winter comes spring, then summer, and then fall or autumn. Okay? So now I've got the rest of them filled in for the northern hemisphere. And then whatever's opposite of that season is what I get to fill in for the southern hemisphere. Like so. And the only other thing I'm going to add to this, kids, is the solstices and the equinoxes. We touched on that in the other oral lecture, but since I've got a few minutes, I did want to expand upon that. Remember that in summer, I get what's called a summer solstice, and I'm going to use the northern hemisphere for this. It's obviously going to be the complete opposite in the southern hemisphere, but since we Texans live in the northern hemisphere, that's when we're going to focus on. So if I look at it here, and here's summer right here in the northern hemisphere, okay, that's my summer solstice. What does that mean? That means that I am going to have the longest day of the year. Now, obviously, there's still 24 hours in any day. What I'm really trying to convey is that it's the longest amount of daylight hours. So, on or about June 20th, and I think I'm going to write that in, June 20th or 21st, like so, that's when I get my longest period of daylight, right? Because I'm maximizing my amount of exposure to the sun. So I may be able to go out and play at 8 o'clock in the morning and not come back home until 9 o'clock at night, and it's still light out, Can't do that in the winter. In fact, in the winter time, we have what's called the winter solstice, which is the shortest amount of daylight. And that occurs on December 20th or 21st. So I'll try to put this back up here again. You can see over here, I've got the winter solstice. The northern hemisphere is directed away from the sun. So now I'm getting the least amount of exposure to the sun. My days are really short. You may have noticed that mom wakes you up to go to school right before we go to Christmas break, and it's dark out. And by the time you're getting off the school bus to go back home and have dinner, it's dark out. So we're having the shortest amount of exposure to our daylight hours when we have our winter solstice. And then if I look at the top or the bottom, we call that our equinox. Equinox means equal. So in this particular one, we're going to call it our autumnal equinox. All right, like so. Our autumnal equinox, and that occurs on or about September 20th or 21st again. And that's when we basically get about 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. We're kind of at that midpoint, okay? And then, of course, on the bottom one, we'll fill that one in, and that would be our spring equinox. Remember, equal, equinox, okay? So now that I've got it completely filled out, you should be able to make a better understanding of our seasons. But again, if you don't know the order of your seasons, it's going to be really difficult to do any kind of work with this. So if you need to, make sure that you are grabbing a few index cards or grab a piece of paper and rip it in 4 quarters and put down your seasons and see if you can get them in order. Because until you do that, you're probably really going to struggle with this part of the unit. The only other thing I wanted to add that I noticed as I kind of check for understanding, if you will, when I'm looking at the quiz grades or the other assignments that you've completed, remember, rotation drives our day and night cycle. That's all it does. That's all rotation is for. It has nothing to do with our seasons at all. There are 2 factors that relate to our seasons. If you may remember, before we went on spring break, you did some reading on this. The first and most important one is the tilt of the Earth. That tilt of 23.5 degrees is huge when dictating our seasons. If the axis was pointed straight up and down, we would have the same seasons throughout the year. Because remember, it's that tilt that's either giving us more exposure to direct sunlight or less exposure to direct sunlight. And of course, the second one is the revolution of the Earth around the sun, right? Because on one side, I'm getting my greater exposure to the sun, so therefore it's going to be somewhere in the northern hemisphere. But if I go to the other side of my orbit, right, halfway around my orbit, now I'm in the exact opposite season, okay? So hopefully that helps you understand seasons a little bit better. Use these notes, kids. They're for you. I want you to be successful. I know that this is a little bit more frustrating than being in a classroom and seeing it on a whiteboard or practicing it in person, but we got to live within the constraints of what we have, and that's where we are right now. So love you, kids. Best wishes. Give me some good work. Bye-bye.